People think if you're dating or marrying somebody of another race, especially in a race that's in a superior position over you, that person will not be racist. We have to understand that slave owners had black mistresses all the time. You understand? Thomas Jefferson, who was really the father of white supremacy, because he started writing books like the Letters from the State of Virginia, really codifying what white supremacy is. He wrote a book talking about how inferior black people were and how supreme white people were. And he got a bunch of black goddamn kids in the field picking cotton.
And he probably was in love with Sally Hemings.
Yes, he was. Yes, he was. So a lot of these people who are in these relationships with black people, when you're in a relationship with somebody, especially sexually, you are in an equal position with them. Two naked people in the bed are equal. So when you get out of that bed, you have to establish, okay, I'm supreme. So yeah, I just had sex with you, but I had sex with a nigga. So you're still beneath me. You have to establish that you are in a superior position. So we have to understand how race and relationships really tie in with each other.
So what you're saying is when you were doing your Mackin books, there was an element of race associated with those books, even though it wasn't overt, it wasn't planned like that?
It wasn't even planned like that. I'm looking at relationships from my perspective as a black man. And white people started reading the book and they were like, okay, this is interesting. As a white man, can this work for me? How can this work for me as a white man? But this black person is in an authoritative position. So how can I flip this for me as a white man? So what a lot of these white authors started to do, they got a lot of information from my books and they started kind of remixing it and calling it pickup artist stuff. You understand? To suit their community. It's the same stuff. They just kind of changed the wording around. So I would do shows or go to meetings with different TV studios and I would give them an idea because they would call me up and they say, hey Tariq, you have any ideas? Because we would like to do a show with you. I said, let's do an idea. Let's do a show where I'm coaching these women. I get a bunch of women who's trying to date men and I give them advice. Oh, that's a great idea. And then a week later, that same show that I pitched them, they go find a white dude who would do the same exact thing and put that on the air. So that type of thing kept going on and on and on. And they would talk to me about doing these television shows about relationships, but they would either take the idea or try to give it to somebody else or try to make me a sidekick with another white male. So I'll say, wait, what's going on with this? And understanding race more, when it comes to black people, we're never supposed to be an authority on something that's constructive. You know what I'm saying? We're supposed to be authorities on something ratchet, something nefarious, something devious. So they'll get a black person to be an authority on, gang banging. They'll get a black person to be an authority on shooting. They'll get a black person to be an authority on twerking. But getting a black person who's an authority on having good, decent conversation, they're like, that's cool, but it'll be better if we get a white guy to do that, you see? So we kept looking at the racial element as far as that.
Okay, so living in Birmingham, Alabama, down south, did you find yourself exposed to a lot of the discrimination and racism that you speak about today? I don't know how many years you spent down there, but is the South certainly a place where an individual is confronted with those types of racist issues more so than being out of the South?
You know what's interesting? When I came out to LA, I saw more racism here than down there. It's very interesting. People think that it's just the South is racist, the South is racist. If you go down south, the white people, even though they might be racist as hell, many of them are conservatives, quote unquote, they're hospitable, meaning that they've already established a certain relationship with the black people. The black people are going to live over here. The white people live over here. They might run into each other at the Winn-Dixie supermarket. They're cordial. Your grandma might work for them as a maid. So there's a cordial type of thing. It's not hostile. Even though you're dealing with white supremacy, they're still in a position where they're in an authoritative position, but it's hospitable. They're like, hey, how you doing, Eddie Earl? They'll speak to you. When I came out here to LA, it was much different. It was hostile. The white people were living off in the suburbs. Black people were not living anywhere near each other out here. I went to places like Thousand Oaks, extremely racist out there. They were very hostile to me out there. This was in the 80s and 90s. The police out here were brutal towards black folks. It wasn't like that in Birmingham. You understand what I'm saying? It was like that in the 60s, but by the time the 70s and 80s popped off, they weren't like that. I came out here and saw the police beating the shit out of brothers and sisters out here. So it was, I'm like, what's going on out here in LA?
Well, I think William Parker, the chief of police during the 1950s and 60s, actually recruited down south and had officers here. So even though this is LA,
yeah,
most of the people in LA are descendants of people from Texas and Louisiana. So that's that southern mentality maybe getting transplanted and transported into the beautiful Los Angeles.
And that's a cop-out from white people. They do that shit. You know why? Because they like to put all the racism on the South. Yeah. That's a cop-out. California has always been racist. Always. From its inception. When they had our sister Biddy Mason out here. There's a sister who was enslaved. And this is another thing about California. There was slavery out here in California. San Bernardino started off as a slave colony. A lot of folks don't know that. The Mormons came out here and they had a whole bunch of black people enslaved. The officials knew about it. They didn't do anything about it. They didn't have slavery on paper because they wanted California to be a free state, meaning they wanted white people to be able to come out here and kind of cut it on their own. They knew if they made it a slave state, the rich slave owners would come out here and get all the prime land and property. So it would be the South all over again. So they wanted to give a fair shot to white people who were not wealthy landowners. So they didn't have technical slavery out here on paper, but slavery was out here. They used slave labor up there to mine gold in Northern California. Slavery was all over here. Biddy Mason was a black woman. It was a very famous case where she talked to some black people out here and they said, hey, you're on free land. You know you can be free now. So there was a court case downtown LA, a whole big thing where they were trying to get her free and she actually won her case. They got like a little monument downtown that's off in the cut called the Biddy Mason Museum. It's not a museum, it's a little bullshit plaque. We're trying to get a street named after Biddy Mason because this woman she was a slave and ended up becoming the wealthiest woman in California, and they act like this woman doesn't exist. So there's always been that type of racism. Bruce's Beach, when they took the black people's land over there in Bruce's Beach and they just gave back the descendants, they gave them some kind of compensation, which is Manhattan Beach. So that racism has always been here. They try to say that, well, it was a whole bunch of whites from the South who came in the 50s and 60s. Bullshit. They were always racist out here. They've always had segregation. Glendale was a sundown town. Black people couldn't even go to Glendale after 6 o'clock or you'd get killed or locked up. So the racism has always been here.
Back to Biddy Mason.
Yeah.
Even though there was definitely racism in the state of California, Los Angeles, but she was able to go to court and a judge ruled in her favor, rightfully so. So to a certain degree, she was able to, she won her freedom in the state of California, something that she probably couldn't have gotten in any other state at that time, which I think was 1860 something. So, you know, even though California wasn't enforcing these slave owners to not bring slaves here, at the end of the day, I think the courts made the right decision. Yeah,
and let's be clear, it was kind of a technicality because black people couldn't testify against the white person in court out here. So she couldn't actually testify against the white man. What happened was the white man, and I forgot his name, but he got ran out of town. He went back to Utah or Texas somewhere. So he wasn't here to testify. So she kind of won by default.
Yeah, and I think the slave owner was warned, hey man, they're gonna come take your slave, and he tried to leave. Yeah. And I think some sheriffs said, hey, you can't leave yet, man. There's a court case. Yeah, I love Biddy Mason's story. I think it's amazing. Yeah, I was actually trying to collaborate with a couple people to write a script about her whole life.
That would be wonderful.
You know, wonderful. They gave her a little bullshit ass park downtown LA. Yeah. She owned all the property on Main Street.
Yes, she did.
And our downtown LA is sitting on her land, you know. So
yeah, they downplay that, man. That's amazing. A person who was a slave and now you own all of this stuff. I mean, she was the wealthiest woman in California at one point.
Yeah, I think you might be able to argue she might have been one of the wealthiest women in the country. She predates
Madam C.J. Walker. Yes, indeed.
She comes like 20, 30 years later.
You know, there's another sister who's in New York who predated Madam C.J. Walker, Hannah Elias. Or Hannah Elias, there's different ways to pronounce it. But she was like a working woman of the night who was finessing white men. And she made millions of dollars finessing white men. And they were trying to sue her. They were like, this bitch is doing voodoo on something. They tried to, you know, find a way to sue her, but she didn't do a crime. She just spitting at these white dudes and, you know, they're breaking their bank accounts, giving their money to this woman. She was the woman who helped get black people to Harlem. Harlem was white at one point. She was one of the people who got with some black real estate developers and started buying up the buildings in Harlem and putting black folks in, and then white people bounced, and that's how Harlem became, a black enclave. And that's another story that's not talked about. Hannah Elias.